știm noi din vremuri strămoșești, cuvânt de dor și luptă, de doine și povești. Dar dacă astăzi pacea e lege și scut, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. Cuvinte le-am moștenit în grai, doar bănuiam ce înseamnă, ce tâlcuri au sub strai. Dar dacă astăzi tâlcul de plin l-am priceput, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. до крайних, южных гор до северных морей. Человек проходит, как хозяин необъятной родины своей. Тут жизнь невольна и широка, точно Волга полная течет. Молодым везде у нас дорога, старикам везде у нас почет. никто у нас не лишний, по заслугам каждый награжден. Золотыми буквами мы пишем всенародный сталинский закон. Этих слов величие и славу никакие годы не сотрут. Человек всегда имеет право на учение, подвиг и на труд. Весенний ветер веет, с каждым днем все радостнее жить. И никто на свете не умеет лучше нас смеяться и любить. Но сурово брови мы насупим, если враг захочет нас сломать. Как небесную родину мы любим, бережем, как ласковую мать.
оклад. И нас не заглянет треск речей под барабанный раскат. Марш левый, два, три, марш левый, два, три, взять ряды, товарищ нам. Ты войдешь в наш единый рабочий фронт, потому что рабочий ты сам. И так как все мы люди, то должны мы, извините, что-то есть. Хотят накормить нас пустой болтовней, чертям спасибо за честь. Марш левый, два, три, марш левый, два, три, взять ряды, товарищ нам. Ты войдешь в наш единый рабочий фронт, потому что рабочий ты сам. И так как ты рабочий, то не жди, что нам поможет другой. Себе мы свободу добудем твою своей рабочей рукой. Марш левый, два, три, марш левый, два, три, встать ряды, товарищ нам. Ты войдешь в наш единый рабочий фронт, потому что рабочий ты сам. Modern in the cities. Ready ein in der Arbeitereinheitsfront, weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist. Ты войдешь в наш единый рабочий фронт, потому что рабочий ты сам. Ready ein in der Arbeitereinheitsfront, weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Pod słońcem rasti jasna dzieci, rasti i cvjetaj zemljoradnih ljudi i neka mir nad tvojim ljudima vlada. Mir tvojim lađama napući i tvome danu što se vedar budi. Rasti sretna da svi narodi vide, sa strana svih, sa juga i sjevera, kako se rađa i kako se voli, kako se brani zemlja proletera. Srcem dita, rasti cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode, pod rukom partije i pod srcem dita. Sreći u vodi i u zraku, u pjesmi strojeva i u sjaju žita. Rasti i cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode, pod rukom partije i pod srcem Tita. Rasti i cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode, pod rukom partije пустяк, в жизни важен первый шаг. Слышишь, веют над страною ветры яростных атак. И вновь продолжает собой, и сердцу тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. Весть летит во все концы, вы поверьте нам, отцы, будут новые победы, станут новые бойцы. Милости не жди, жизнь для правды не щади. Нам, ребята, в этой жизни только с правдой по пути. И вновь продолжает собой, и сердце тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди.
Right, okay, so that was a no audio experiment there. For some reason, the mute button was on. So, good evening, everybody, and welcome. It is the 8th of January, 2026, and here we are with the live stream covering the Atlantic hijack and various other things. So, are we still muted? Hang on. Right, sound problem there is that we are okay, so we're all good. Right, so welcome along, everybody. We are going to be looking at the ICE execution squad's actions in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, in particular, and the murder of a 37-year-old woman named Renee Good, apparently a mother of three there. Going to be looking at that in the context of the Trump administration's immigration policies and how those fit in to the broader history of immigration policy and police militarization in the United States. Then we're going to look at the Atlantic hijack and what this means and how this is not just about the oil blockade on Venezuela, which is truth be told, a patchy blockade at best. This is also about the attempt by the United States to, I would say, pressure the Russians into selling or should we say, agreeing a sellout deal. The sellout deal, of course, on the table, so to speak, in these rather fraudulent negotiations that the US is engaged in. Now, and the other thing to talk about tonight is, of course, the British political reaction to the raid on the Russian-flagged vessel in the Northern Atlantic Ocean. So we're going to be looking at that as well. But before we get anywhere, I'll ask everybody to be sure to like and share the stream if you have not done so already. Be sure to subscribe to the various platforms that we are on. We are currently live on YouTube and on Rumble and on Twitch and on X and on Substack as well. The newest addition to the platforms, doing pretty well on there. So be sure to subscribe to everywhere. So if one gets knocked off, you can always fall back on the other. Now, we will begin with the what I'm going to call the execution style killing of a 37-year-old woman named Renee Good in Minneapolis, and how this fits in with some of the broader things that the Trump administration is doing. Because the killing of this woman by this twitchy ICE agent psycho, who apparently is according to one story, a 10-year-long veteran of ICE. So apparently you don't get better with age. Now, it's crucial here to bear in mind that there's going to be a lot of sound and fury coming from the Democratic Party over this killing. And there's going to be a lot of attempts by the Democrats to manipulate the genuine and quite right and correct public outrage over the actions of ICE into a vote for the Democrats in the upcoming midterm elections. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about why that needs to be rejected out of hand in just a moment. But just to, first of all, give context as to what is happening and why is it that ICE, who are an agency with an acronym which sounds cool to idiots who read Punisher comics as serious literature. ICE stands for Immigration and Customs Enforcement. It was formed out of a merger of different agencies through the passage of the Patriot Act over 20 years ago, which infamously passed through Congress with very few, if any, members of Congress of either house having actually read the thing. So it was founded via a merger of different agencies, including the old Immigration and Naturalization Service. It was founded as an enforcement arm of one of the enforcement arms of the new Department for Homeland Security, which again is another vast bureaucratic security agency created by the Bush administration, which fits in with the broader trajectory of militarization and securitization of law enforcement and the hardwiring into all of this of vast powers of espionage, being exercised by the federal government against the citizenry of the United States. And this process didn't start with the Bush administration. This starts, I would argue, much earlier. It starts with the federal government's response to the radical wave in the 60s and 70s. It starts with things like the militarization of local law enforcement. Begins with the foundation of SWAT teams, which were used essentially to take out the Black Panthers and other revolutionaries in the 70s and early 1980s. The process continues through the 80s and the 90s and really speeds up post 9/11. So ICE as an agency sits within that broader context of extreme militarization of the police forces of the United States, which was never exactly a, shall we say, a laid-back society when it came to the special bodies of armed men of the capitalist state anyway. But ever since the events on 9/11, the police agencies of the United States have multiplied in terms of their numbers and in terms of their powers and also in terms of the equipment that they wield. This was a scandal under the Obama administration following the killing of the black teenager, Mike Brown, and others that triggered the first wave of the Black Lives Matter movement during the later period of the Obama administration, where Obama would do his usual thing of getting teary-eyed, wringing his hands, saying, "Oh, folks, it's really bad out there," and doing absolutely nothing to, in fact, making the situation worse, which is, of course, he did with regard to police militarization. Now, this is all relevant because what you see here with the killing of Renee Good by this twitchy psycho of an ICE agent isn't just an isolated incident. It fits in with this much longer history of the United States government, that is the federal government, militarizing its national police forces. And it has several national police forces, several, including like DHS, and now including ICE, now including like Customs and Border Patrol, of course, the FBI, the National Secret Police Force, and a lot of internal security agencies dealing with domestic surveillance of Americans. In fact, that the domestic surveillance of Americans is probably the lasting achievement of the Bush administration. Together with, of course, the not just the militarization of all the different American police agencies, be it at the federal level, the state, or the local level. I mean, just after the again, the Black Lives Matter movement got started a decade ago now, over a decade ago, there was all these revelations about like tiny, what I think the Americanism is rinky-dink police departments in the middle of nowhere having like an armored personnel carrier or having like a tank that they got from surplus from the US Army. Why they would ever possibly need that is an interesting question. But it goes along with militarization of police forces across the Western world. The United States, as the most advanced imperialist country with the most, shall we say, advanced symptoms of decaying imperialism, is the first in this particular race towards militarization, but it's happening everywhere. It's less pronounced in Britain because here, even the rank and file cops still don't carry handguns. There's a lot of opposition to that, even in quite like upper petty bourgeois circles. There is an unwillingness, or should we say, even perhaps some kind of like hang up on arming the police here, which I think we should be grateful for, given the kind of people who join the police. However, militarization is a common symptom across the Western world, and the United States is leading the way in that. And who is the target of this? Is it the mysterious Al Qaeda terrorists? Well, it can't be them because the CIA and the various other different American military and intelligence agencies is in bed with Al Qaeda, quite literally. So if it's not the mythical external enemy, is it the hidden Russian spies? Is it the hidden Chinese infiltration teams? No, it's the American working class. That's who the target of all of this is. And whether the heads of the police agencies and the politicians that fund them know it or not, what they're actually doing is pushing forward an agenda which is absolutely necessary for the US ruling class over the last 30 years, which is that they, on some level, or the people who do the thinking for them, know that there is nothing better coming for the American working class, only relentless grinding war upon them and their living standards. waged by the American ruling class. They have nothing better to offer them anymore. This is especially true after the 2008 crash. So the only way that they're going to be able to keep the working class in line in the face of ever escalating attacks is ultimately going to be the gun. And the militarization of the police force is a part of their eventual strategy, shall we say, to deal with the revolt when it does come. They have been preparing for this for decades. That's the reality behind police militarization. There are a lot of other motivating factors in this: bureaucratic incentives, short-term political gain. But as Marxists, we always seek to go to the root of it. And the root of it is, after the counter-revolutions that destroyed the people's democracies in the Soviet Union, after the taking of the capitalist road by the Chinese, the US ruling class knew damn well that it was never going to, or thought that they were never going to have to offer any better future for the working class ever again. And so they could just resort to pure repression. They could drain even the tiniest amount of potential dissent out of the political system. They could completely command that. They could rule bureaucratically, and they can deal with dissent via the application of the policeman's baton or gun. That's the context in which the agency known as ICE is created. And of course, it's created and then goes along through successive administrations before the Trump administration seizes on it as its sort of go-to favored law enforcement unit. Because every political coalition in the United States in the bourgeois system has its favored, shall we say, bits of the state that it likes to control or likes to try to seek more control over. The Democrats became very enamored with both the CIA and the FBI. In fact, they always have been, but even more so after the Obama administration, particularly when they thought they were going to be able to use them to cripple the Trump administration. And in fairness, they were largely successful at that in certain ways in Trump's first term. Trump and his gang of what can only be described as fascist knuckle draggers, lunatics, and mouth breathers favored ICE as it fitted in with some of their political priorities. It was an agency which first of all, the American left hated, and that appeals to like the people who do the thinking for Trump, people like Stephen Miller. And also it was an agency that fitted in well with their stated priorities of mass deportations. Now, they didn't really manage to get started on this they did a lot of deportations in the first Trump administration, but they didn't manage to match Obama's numbers. Trump in the second administration has acted with a degree more ruthlessness, though so far what he's managed to do is go for a lot of flash and bang, but still isn't matching the numbers that Biden had. Now, the change in immigration policy is here relevant in terms of considering why those ICE agents have been out all over the United States. If you look online for ICE agents get violent or something, you can find loads of videos of like perfectly law-abiding residents of the United States suddenly getting a knock on the door, and in some cases getting arrested as they take their children to school. Because what the Trump administration has done isn't just try to remove those who are, as Trump would put it, criminal illegal aliens. They've tried to reopen immigration cases that were either settled or at least paused, and I'll come to what that means in just a moment, or that have gone through the system since 2021. So using the justification of an illegal alien killing that National Guard member back in DC several weeks ago now, the Trump administration vastly expanded the work of the immigration service in terms of investigating cases that weren't settled. In fact, going after some people whose cases were settled. So after the shooting of that National Guardsman, the Trump administration filed more than 117,000 requests to reopen cases that immigration judges had deemed a low priority and had been, I think the term is administratively closed. So they were removed from court calendars, but they weren't dismissed and they weren't completely closed. So essentially, there's a whole lot of people living in the United States whose immigration status isn't completely settled. They sort of live in a something of a legal grey area, it seems, and this was largely tolerated by the authorities in the United States because it suited the ruling class at the time. That's a ready source of labor. If you have people with an uncertain immigration status, that's actually quite good for you as an employer because it keeps them on the edge. It means that they're not going to make too much trouble because an immigration case which has been taken off the court calendar can be put back on the court calendar again. If somebody, say, starts acting up at work, starts asking questions, starts perhaps trying to form a union, if they've got an unsettled immigration status, well, then you can use that against them. So what the Trump administration's doing is it's attacking all these people who are in these legal gray areas, it would seem. And the reason why they're suddenly storming into quite, not well-off areas, but like solid working class areas where there's relatively high levels of employment. The reason why they're suddenly sending ICE storming into these areas and snatching people whose immigration status was, if not settled, then at least, shall we say, was regarded as being pretty stable, is because, well, partly because Trump has made this commitment to a million deportations a year, and they've been running to get to that total. So that's part of it. But also, and part of that motivation is that they're looking for easy targets. So an easier target to go after is just people whose status has basically been put on the back burner for years. You run around after them. They're unlikely to go to ground or offer any kind of resistance because these are normal people working jobs quite a lot of the time. They've got settled lives in the United States. And so by going after them, the people who design these policies, I think people like Stephen Miller, Trump himself doesn't design them. Trump himself doesn't do much of anything. But what they aim to do is to get a bunch of easy targets and essentially then deport them, and do it before any appeals can be filed, before any objections can be raised, which is why you're seeing these raids going on. Now here we've got a situation where what's happened is you have a narrative in American politics about the border, about the need to control the border, that's very old. I mean, this is stuff in U.S. politics that's been floating around in terms of a narrative about the border being swamped, etc. That goes back to really, arguably, at least the 80s and early 1990s. Clinton, that is, good old Bill, it wasn't me and Jeffrey Epstein's hot tub. Clinton took significant steps to militarize the U.S. border when it was immediately after he'd signed NAFTA into law, and it had come into play. It had ruined a bunch of small to medium-sized Mexican farmers and destroyed Mexican agriculture for years after it got exposed to American competition due to the passage of NAFTA, sending hordes of Mexican agricultural workers over the border to try and seek work in the United States. So there followed a demand for militarization of the border, which of course Clinton duly gave them because he had an eye on his re-election in 1996. Border militarization is it's a tremendously cynical political weapon which the bourgeois politicians basically pick up and wave around whenever they've got an election on the go. Democrats and Republicans. Now, remember, one of the reasons that George W. Bush, his own party, turned on him was because, like George W. Bush being a much more conventional big business hack, wanted to actually do some kind of immigration reform that would legalize the status of a lot of people, because this was something that this was something that big business was actually in favor of at the time. This, of course, caused a revolt from the Republican base, because the Republicans, like the Democrats, play with these issues for years. They string their voting base along with the promise of, well, with the Republicans for years, it was, we're going to ban abortion anytime now, anytime now, anytime now. They were never, until Trump, they were never actually going to do it at the national level by getting rid of Roe versus Wade, just as the Democrats for decades did the same cynical game with their base, which is the Republicans are coming for Roe versus Wade, the Republicans are coming for it, better vote for whatever shit candidate we've got, otherwise, you know, it's the handmaid's tale. Only eventually Trump came along and actually did it, surprising everybody, because it turns out you can't put this stuff out into the ether for 20, 30, 40 years and not actually address it without it gathering some, shall we say, political momentum behind it. This is, of course, when it comes to immigration, magnified by the fact that by the time Trump runs in 2016, you've had almost a decade of economic degeneration in the United States. The liberals, the Obama defenders, will claim that Obama revitalized the American economy. No, he didn't. What he oversaw was, of course, a wave of casualization in the American economy, meaning that the only job sectors that grew properly in the Obama era were those that were associated with casualized working. That was the biggest job growth in the Obama era. It was people on casual contracts, agency contracts, temporary contracts. So by the time you get to 2016, the anti-immigration issue is becoming a big one in, of course, the Republican primary, and it became one in the Democratic primary as well. Remember, Hillary Clinton was talking about a border wall. Remember the border wall Trump never built? You know, so there were many of these people were talking about it because they realized that, well, we need to divert some of the anger of like working class and even petty bourgeois voters into something that's more safe than, should we say, looking at the actions of the American ruling class. So let's give them immigration. And then Trump, of course, comes along and doubles down on everybody else's rhetoric, and the rest is history. The point being that this has now got when something becomes an issue like that, it takes on something of a political life of its own. And Trump himself is being caught trying to ride two horses on this issue. Because on the one hand, he's doing all this stuff like reopening old cases, arresting like very respectable looking mothers outside of their children's schools, brutalizing people, and of course, ICE agents murdering people in the street. And on the other, he's saying, well, we need more H-1B visas. So, because that's what the tech guys asked for. What the tech guys asked for was, well, we need you to bring in more people from Southeast Asia, South Asia, to fill our ranks, because we don't want to fucking train them. But we'll take them from India, we'll take them from China, etc. And hence why a big portion of Trump's base got revolted against him, because suddenly he was out there arguing for more immigration, not less. So that increases the need for Trump to put on more theatrics for the knuckle draggers who are still following him around, because he's already tied himself in knots over this issue. So that's some of the context in which this killing takes place, and one of the reasons why you've had big demonstrations of like, should we say, ICE in the streets of America. Partially, it's about finding easy targets for these mass deportations, which Trump has promised. It's also a large element of political theatrics, deadly theatrics, as it turns out in this case, because as the Democrats will complain about, this isn't even the most effective way to actually find people who are in the country illegally. These big, showy raids that Trump has been indulging in, it is, shall we say, it's a crude and simpleton's understanding of the way that these things actually operate, which, of course, appeals completely to Trump because he is a crude simpleton. just as the raid to snatch Maduro turned out to have been stunningly poorly fought out, really badly fought out, as we'll get to in just a moment. The ICE raids are, well, partly they are the traditional function of ICE, which is that they're another labor disciplinary mechanism. They are there to make, again, the people whose status is insecure or unsettled. The ICE is there as a permanent threat that can be held against them if they misbehave by the bosses. But again, large elements of this now is the Trump administration using this national police agency as a political support mechanism to demonstrate to their voters that they're out there doing something. That's part of what's going on. Part of it is a political motivation. Now, the other part of this, and here I'll get to the slightly more under the counter dealings, is that there is in the United States, as there is in all the imperialist countries, but in the United States being the biggest imperialist country, this is particularly pronounced, and the most powerful imperialist country. There is in the United States, and has been for decades now, a hardcore fascistic militarist clique that is part of the American ruling class. It's part of the state apparatus. They are part of like the ranks of all the national law enforcement bodies and the military as well. Britain has the same thing. France has the same thing. That fascism is organic to the bourgeoisie anywhere, but particularly in the imperialist nations. And American fascism is a real thing. It's not the Proud Boys or the sort of cartoonish, Atomwaffen people, if you remember them from Trump's first term, or any of the other like FBI-run fucking brown amateur hour brown shirt operations. It's not really them. They're just put out there to sort of scare the liberals. Where it really resides is in the high offices of state. It's within the certain sections of the ruling class itself. There's always a section of the ruling class that is pro-fascist anywhere. Some of them are more some of the ruling class are more liberal, etc. But there is always an element which is fascistic. And as the system slides more and more into crisis, as it has done now for almost 20 years, remember, we are now in an 18-year-long economic depression in the heartlands of imperialism. As that gets worse, the temptations of fascism grow for the ruling class. Now, again, let's revisit the classics here in terms of the discussion of fascism. Let's always bear in mind we must return to the work of Georgy Dimitrov and Rajani Palmdutt to examine this question. The purpose of fascism, what is it? It's to launch a full-blown attack upon the terms and conditions, living standards of the working class, the domestic working class, and it is getting to the point now in the United States and Britain and France and Germany where that's something that they will need to do. They will need to carry that out because they are not going to be able to match the rate of industrial production of the Chinese or the Russians when it comes to war material with the current balance of forces in the United States, with the current cost of production in the United States. Trump was bitching and moaning about this the other day when he put out one post on Truth Social saying, on the one hand, these executives paying each other themselves so many bonuses when they're not producing stuff for our great military. So he said that in one Truth Social post, and in the next one, he started moaning about how he started saying, we're going to increase the military budget to $1.5 trillion. It's going to be amazing. So within the space of two posts, I'm not sure how many came before it because I don't follow the fucker on Truth Social. You get like the absolute madness of like the current system, which is on the one hand, Trump correctly identifies that the heads of the military industrial complex aren't actually producing things and are just squirreling money away to do stock buybacks and pay themselves off. On the other hand, he says, and we're going to give them more money. But the point being that the only way out in terms of if the American ruling class wants to actually increase industrial production is via fascist methods, meaning drastic reduction in the living standards of the American worker, meaning you have to reduce, to go back to Marxist economics here, you have to reduce the amount of money it costs for the American worker to reproduce himself or herself, meaning the amount that is required for an American worker to do the job and continue to stand up. You need to reduce that amount down drastically. There's various methods to do that you can use to do that, but you need to reduce it down so you can reduce the wages, because only by reducing the cost of labor dramatically are you going to be able to actually go back and even stand the remotest chance of catching up with the Chinese. Pure automation isn't going to do it. You need to lower the cost of labor. That's the core motivation for fascism. That and, smashing, preventing a potential revolution, smashing working class organizations. But the core motivation is the restoration of profitability via the application of extremely violent methods, because those are the only methods you have left. This is the core motive for Italian fascism, German fascism, in particular, those two, Spanish fascism as well. Fascism talks about the revival of the nation. The fascists just don't like to talk about how they're going to do it. So, to bring it back to ICE and police militarization, there's a reason why the police agencies like ICE are acting more and more like the IDF or the American army occupying Iraq or Afghanistan. First of all, it's because all of these law enforcement agencies do act like an occupying army because they are one. They're the army of the ruling class in the streets of the United States. There's no matter how much propaganda gets put out there, that is their fundamental purpose. They are the strong arm of the U.S. bourgeois state. The other part of this is, of course, that the militarization element that has been, as I said, growing and growing over recent years is going to be absolutely necessary for them as they move into this next stage. The militarization element isn't going to be stopped, no matter what the Democrats like to posture about, because they are moving towards the stage where, as I said just a moment ago, they're going to need to launch a full-on assault on the American working class. That's coming soon, maybe with the next twist in this long-running economic crisis that has afflicted imperialism, particularly if things in Ukraine go south in a major way, which they are. The assault on the American worker is coming very, very soon, and they are going to need these agencies staffed by like every knuckle-dragging psycho they can find. And one of the reasons why ICE has got so many scandals attached to it now is because they increased the size of the agency over the past year via the dropping of standards. So they actually, like they do with the American Armed Forces, they more than doubled the workforce of ICE. It was increased its workforce by over double in just over 4 months. That's more than 12,000 new ICE officers and agents that have been added to a agency which previously only had 10,000. So you've suddenly more than doubled the workforce there, and this means that's been acknowledged by even bourgeois news sources in the United States as having come about by drastically lowering the standards, going from a several month in-person training course to an online training course, dropping the physical requirements. So if you drop the physical requirements, you end up with a bunch of people in these agencies who are physically weaker and therefore more scared, therefore more likely to do what this guy did the other day, which is just immediately go for the gun and go for the kill, because they're permanently terrified of everything. This is what these little men are like. So Trump's increased the size of ICE drastically and dropped the recruitment standards as well. Now, here's an interesting question. For all that Tim Walz, governor of Minnesota, for all that Jacob Frey said, fuck off out of our city, and all the Democrats fucking creamed themselves, will the Democrats ever actually take any action against ICE as an agency? Will they ever, for instance, do away with it? There was like an abolish ICE movement in the first Trump administration, but strangely enough, that disappeared during the Biden administration. So the Democrats have had 3 presidential terms, including some where they controlled Congress, or at least controlled the House of Representatives, including in Obama's first term, they had like a supermajority. Did they ever do anything about ICE? Did Biden do anything about ICE? Because he had 4 years, and Trump had already made it clear that that was his agency of choice. So if Trump's the most dangerous man in America right now, and instituting like fascism all by himself, then surely you would want to dismantle his chosen agency. Well, no, Biden didn't do any of the sort, because the Democrats aren't into that. Democrats aren't going to reverse police militarization, are they? Given that they were responsible for so much of it, and fundamentally, it's a non-partisan thing, because this derives from a need of the American ruling class. So you can, the Democrats and the DSA can, the left of the Democrats can posture all they like about, reforming the police force, putting more social workers there, etc., etc., or even maybe they'll say defund the police every now and again. Well, that's about as unlikely to happen as Trump giving a full and frank confession about his time on Jeffrey Epstein's island. The police militarization is a ruling class priority, and it won't stop, no matter which clown occupies the White House. So to pull this back then, and to go back to where we started here, which is the killing of Renee Good by this ICE officer. This is the inevitable consequence of the police militarization and the turning loose of these psychos across the United States by the Trump administration, and with no real serious resistance to it coming from the Democrats. What you get from the Democrats, as always, is a lot of noise, but no serious attempts to oppose it. Why? Because to seriously attempt to oppose the deployment of federal law enforcement in any area of the United States would lead you on a collision course. I mean, you can take a legal case, but that takes months, if not longer. If you say, if Waltz was actually serious, which he's not, in terms of getting ICE out of his state, would he, for instance, deploy the Minnesota National Guard to do it? No, he won't. He won't do that, because that leads, to a full-on clash with the federal government. And Waltz and all the other Democrats in Minnesota are reliable Democratic Party hacks. They're not. They are answerable to the people who run the Democratic Party, who are direct employees of the American ruling class. They're not going to engage in that sort of clash with the central government. There's, unlike people who live permanently online, anybody who examines the real world knows that there's no enthusiasm in the American ruling class for Civil War Part 2. This is silly meme stuff that goes on. Tim Waltz is not going to chase ICE out of Minnesota using the Minnesota National Guard. He's not. Nor is Jacob Frey going to do anything other than create a meme moment. These people aren't into that kind of conflict. Nor, unfortunately, are there any American John Browns out there these days. There might be some. I could be wrong. But mostly people are going to march around, make a noise, and go home again. The anger in American society is increasing, but unfortunately, a lot of the legitimate protests that grow up around like scandals like this, scandalous murders like this, again, because they're dominated by the Democratic Party, are just led down dead ends to go absolutely nowhere. And I hope that can be avoided this time. Hopefully the comrades in the ACP will have a good approach to any protest that pops up in their area, but I'm not in the United States, and I doubt I'll ever be let back in ever again. So we'll have to see. But to go back and conclude the point about American fascism when it arrives, will arrive to fulfill that principal task of attacking the American working class. And to do that, it will need vast bodies of armed men. And it'll need armed men in terms of employees of the state. But as always with fascism, it will also need its irregulars. And this is part of why, to get the special bodies of armed men ready to go against the working class, you will need, of course, the state agencies, the law enforcement agencies, beefed up and armed up and ready to go. But also, you will need a degree of, should we say, paramilitary irregulars, which is what you might start to see in the next few years. By paramilitary irregulars, I mean things like private armies, things like, Hitler had the brown shirts, Mussolini had the black shirts, which were essentially private armies, militias, funded ultimately by who? In Italy's case, it was the northern Italian capitalists and the southern Italian landlords. In the case of Germany, the funding came from the combination of the German big industrialists and the German aristocracy. That's who funded the Sturmarbeitlang, Ernst Röhm's guys. And their principal role was strike breakers and head crackers in terms of them going after the communists and the other organized worker resistance against the fascists. Now, ultimately, we're not at the stage in the United States where the class struggles escalated to the point where they're going to need fascism. They're going to try and grind down the American working class in the usual way, whilst retaining elements of some elements, at least, of the old liberal order. Now, what you've got, though, because you do have a growing and prominent fascistic militarist clique in the United States, some of whom are basically right-wing accelerationists, like Stephen Miller and people like him, are right-wing accelerationists. Miller, I'm betting, because he's a ghoulish psycho, will be really relishing this moment, because his only regret will be that the person who got shot wasn't a black guy. But then they will be relishing this moment because they see it as an opportunity to further stoke two things. One, the idea of the country being on the edge of civil war, which they enjoy that kind of stuff. They enjoy that kind of rhetoric. They think that it politically helps them. But also, they think that this will do them short-term good in the elections to come, help rally the base, etc. But also, they hope that it accelerates moves amongst the rabid American petty bourgeoisie towards further towards supporting future fascistic maneuvers. That's what the right-wing accelerationist guys ultimately lust after. Now, at the moment, I would say this against the sort of overheated rhetoric of a lot of people online. Again, there's no need for, at this stage, the ruling class to roll straight over into fascism. But fascism amongst the American ruling class, and not just in aesthetic terms, Elon doing his, autistic twitch to camera or something, it's becoming more of a thing because the crisis is deepening, and more of them are realizing that with things going wrong vis-a-vis the war in Ukraine, with things not working out very well with their attempts to hobble the Chinese so far, that the war will need to be turned inward pretty soon. And that's where things like the IDF come in. That's why so many American police departments and American federal agencies send their men and women to go and get trained in Israel. Why? Is it because they just love Judaism so much? Well, probably not. Is it because they all want to go over there and kiss the wall of that old Roman fort? Because it's not actually the wall of that temple. It's all a fake. The reason why they send them is because they're getting ready to treat people in the United States as a whole the same way that the IDF and the Israeli security agencies treat the Palestinians. Meaning not just brutalization, shooting people, gassing people, torturing people. That's all part of it. I mean, administering an apparatus of bureaucratic terror. So if you look at how the Palestinians live in the West Bank and how they used to live in Gaza before the events of October the 7th. That's the future that the American ruling class has in mind for Americans. Why else do you think they're sending all these law enforcement officials over there to receive training from the IDF? Well, part of it is a con, because every retired Israeli officer goes into business for himself, apparently running a security consultants company. But also, this is the future. One of the reasons Israel exists and it is used by the United States is because it's a place where you can experiment with all kinds of military technology, surveillance technology, drone technology, other forms of repression that wouldn't be allowed at the moment inside the continental United States. Well, you can try them all out on the Arab population. You can try them all out on the Palestinians. And then you can train your law enforcement officials in these techniques and as to how to use them. And you can get ready to construct the high-tech tyranny that ultimately the American fascism will require. Because that's what ultimately the purpose of this is. This is why they use Israel. It's why Israel is like a sort of military, not only a garrison state, a power projection into West Asia, but also a vision in some ways of the future that the most fascistic elements in the American ruling class have in mind for their own American working class population. They will treat the American working class like the IDF treats Palestinians. That's what the police agencies are being trained for. That's why they do this. And so it shouldn't be a surprise, really, that the response of these ICE psychos is to reach for the gun and shoot someone in the head, because not only there is a long tradition of that inside the United States anyway, but this is what they're trained to do now. Shoot first, don't ask any questions, and the president will go on TV and give a sort of Netanyahu type explanation as to how a car slowly moving away from you was a dire threat to your life and you had to shoot somebody, an unarmed woman, in the head. That's the future. Israel is like the vanguard for fascist forces across the entirety of the imperialist bloc. Has been for a long time. So I hope I've given some broader context to the murder of Renee Good in Minneapolis. We await to see what goes down with this at the moment. Still a developing story. So other things to cover, and I'll just cover these a couple of other stories here things that have gone on over the last couple of days. So first thing to talk about, which is that the Atlantic hijack, so to speak, which is that the Russian flagged tanker Marinera was ambushed, well, not ambushed, but tracked by the US Coast Guard to 5,500 miles outside of the borders of the United States, and then intercepted just south of Iceland on the way to Scotland, and on the way through Scottish waters. Now, the way in which this went down was quite interesting, because the tanker itself was empty, according to most reporting on it. It was riding high in the water, which means it actually already discharged its load. The Trump administration was claiming it was part of the mythical Russian shadow fleet, which just means tankers that run Russian oil that aren't flagged in Russian colors. Now, this tanker temporarily took on Russian colors, seemingly after it had already emptied its load, which seems rather strange. But what it's done basically is further confirm the tactics of the Trump administration, but also these are not just Trump's tactics. These will be the tactics also probably of the Biden administration as well, though perhaps they wouldn't be quite as crude about it, but you never know. Maybe they would. But the aim of the tanker seizures, it's not just about the siege on Venezuela, even though that is absolutely part of it. The reason why they went after it when it reflagged itself as Russian, even though apparently, irony of ironies, most of the crew was Ukrainian. And the officers were Russian, the crew was Ukrainian. There you go. Peace has been achieved. But the reason why they're doing this, and you see like drone attacks and seizure of ships, both attacks by drones, both in the air and from the sea, Russian tankers is this is all part of the Trump administration's attempt to force the Russians into a shit deal over Ukraine. This is why it's all happening as it is at the moment. They are attempting to, so they think, pressure the Russians into agreeing to the deal that Trump has cooked up. Now, funnily enough, Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron managed to sabotage these efforts over the past couple of days, but I'll come to that in just a moment. So, the attacks on shipping, again, partially about exerting pressure on Venezuela, because as we talked about in the Decline and Fall episode, for all Trump's grandiose claims about how we control it now, he doesn't. After the abduction of Maduro, the full story of the abduction of Maduro we still don't know, but I'll come to that when more is confirmed. But what is clear, and becoming more clear, is that Trump doesn't have control over Venezuela. Again, Marco Rubio, John Bolton, Elliot Abrams and co. have all whined about the fact that they don't. So clearly part of it is to keep the pressure on the Venezuelan government. That's part of the motivation for keeping on hijacking these ships. Part of it is to attempt to exert pressure on the Russians. Part of it is a maneuver to slowly normalize, essentially, piracy in order to try, and I don't think this is something that will ever succeed, and ultimately choke off China's sea trade with the world. That's one of the things that they want to do. It won't succeed. Again, these are bluff and intimidation tactics that they're engaged in here. They don't have the capacity, the United States doesn't, to send its coast guards and its navy chasing all the way around the world, shutting shipping lanes down, because you'd end up with the price of goods in the West going through the roof, and you'd end up with domestic revolts over that. These are attempts to essentially force, particularly the Russians, to agree to this deal that Trump is floating with regard to Ukraine. Now, what the tactics of the Trump administration with regard to this vary, because on the one hand, they keep talking about how they want to settle things, but on the other hand, they seem to be doing things like, well, an apparent attempt to assassinate Putin, even though we're now hearing that Putin wasn't even there at that Valdai residence, that essentially that the Putin security officers wouldn't allow him to essentially disclose his location to Trump, because they know very well how the Americans use negotiations essentially as bait to lure people out into the open and then kill them. So apparently the latest is Putin wasn't there, but it should be seen at least as part of the pressure operations, as it was the striking of the Russian strategic bombers at that Air Force base a while back, as is the attacks on the tankers. These are all attempts to essentially push the Russians into accepting Trump's deal. Again, Harris or Biden would have done similar things. And this, again, is causing, shall we say, something of a debate in Russian and pro-Russian circles about, well, what the hell is the Russian government going to do now? Why don't they respond, etc.? Apparently, and again, there were rumors today that there was some kind of response from the Russian government. In the Odessa region, there was a report that came out on RIA Novosti, quoting an Odessa region resistance member. Now, that is somebody who is fighting against NATO and the Kiev regime, that the Russians had struck a NATO training center, killing several British officers, American officers, and a whole load of Ukrainians who have been trained on the operation of sea drones, which is something that the Brits keep doing, and then the Russians keep killing those that they've trained. So again, there is rumors that was done. I don't know whether it was done specifically in response to this, but it was more probably done in response to the Ukrainians using sea drones to attack shipping coming into the Black Sea, and goes along with the insane British idea that they're going to somehow gain influence over the Black Sea and shut the Russians out of it, as if this was 1855 all over again. And by the way, that didn't work even then. So this is all part of the same strategy that's going on here, which is the Trump administration desperately trying to apply pressure to the Russians, desperate to get this shit deal through. Now, part of this, the other part, as I said, there's a lot of moving parts to every decision. And part of this is the machinations of Starmer and Macron and Friedrich Merz over the potential deployment of troops to Ukraine. We'll get to that in just a moment. But just to finish on the Atlantic hijack, it has also landed Keir Starmer and the First Minister of Scotland, John Swinney, in a degree of trouble, because what it's done is, again, it's revealed that Britain, as a NATO member, basically, and as the US's long-standing partner in crime, is permanently obliged to keep all of its military facilities open for the usage of the United States, because the US military team that took that ship flew into England, went up through Scotland, refueled near a small Scottish town called Wick, then took the long flight over to seize what turned out to be an empty oil tanker. Now, Starmer initially said that the British didn't have anything to do with it, but of course the British supplied the essential logistics support to enable the raid to happen in the first place. So the British government is directly involved in supporting an attack and the seizure of a Russian-flagged vessel. Just so we're clear here. And the other person who's up to their neck with this is, of course, First Minister of Scotland, John Swinney, a man so uncharismatic and so boring that the closest comparison I can make to him is a large and unending bowl of unflavored porridge. A man so devoid of wit and wisdom that he makes a dry flannel look almost Einsteinian by comparison. He is a desiccated accountant. He is the living embodiment of the Scottish cringe. And of course, he, having waffled all over the place about the raid and the abduction of Nicolas Maduro the other day, but basically saying, well, that Maduro, he was bad, but I just didn't like the way that Trump did it, promptly clammed up and said, well, extremely little about the usage of what his party claim they want to be a country, that is Scotland, the usage of Scotland's airspace and waters to support the United States in a raid that took a Russian-flagged vessel. And this is the thing. I'm focusing on Swinney because Starmer, you would just expect this. You would just expect this. Now, I focus on Swinney and the SNP because this is an important thing. It gives lie to all of their stated intentions about their wish to obtain Scottish independence and sovereignty. Because if you notice that the SNP are very, very militantly pro-NATO, just as they are militantly pro-EU. So if you're militantly pro-NATO and you want Scotland, an independent Scotland, which is what the SNP say they want, to join NATO, well, then you would have to sign up to the same NATO treaties that bind the current government in London, meaning you would have to sign up to allow the United States, and by extension Israel, to use your airspace, your territory, to conduct military operations against those that the United States deems to be its enemies, principally at the moment in the North Atlantic area, that's the Russians. You give up control of your military and defense policy if you join NATO. So again, if the SNP somehow, by some strange quirk of fate, actually got Scottish independence achieved, they would immediately then give up power over Scottish defence, and Scottish territorial sovereignty would be surrendered to the NATO command. So what value is that then? If you don't control your own defence, to quote Donald Trump, you don't have a border, you don't have anything. Because if you join NATO, you are obliged to by the NATO treaties, to let all the other NATO countries come to your country for training and exercises, and you can even be obliged to have foreign troops on your soil because they're part of the NATO alliance. So what value has that independence if that's what you're signing up to straight away? And if you're signing up to join the EU, well, then you're surrendering control over your your economic decisions basically to the German ruling class, and by extension, the United States. So this whole incident with regard to Venezuela and the fact that Swinney, the alleged wannabe leader of an independent Scotland, basically backhandedly approved of the abduction of Maduro, though he didn't say it outright. He sort of waffled all over the place about how he didn't like Maduro, but this was a bit run. And then approves of the US usage of Scottish airspace, Scottish waters, Scottish resources to seize a Russian flagged oil tanker. And this is all part of him leading a party which is militantly pro-NATO. This guy's a joker, as is his party. These people aren't fighting for anything other than continue to draw paychecks for themselves for being members of the Scottish Parliament. These people are agents of the British ruling class. There's no two ways about it. I mean, at the very least, one could utter a protest, but no, they're all in favour of this. This is a farce. The SNP is a fraud. There's absolutely nothing in there that's radical or dangerous to British imperialism. They're fully on board with British imperialism. Just look at how comfortable John Swinney is at the big state dinners where he gets to sit on the big table next to Keir Starmer. I wouldn't be that happy to be within a 500-mile radius of Keir Starmer. God knows what that guy's got up to. Well, actually, God might not know. Certain Ukrainian male models might know, allegedly. So John Swinney and the SNP, then, just to round off this segment, perfectly pro-NATO, pro-Trump, pro-piracy, and apparently, pushing Scotland into a position where it's part of ever-escalating tensions with the Russian Federation. So, bang-up job there, done there, lads. Good stuff. Really, really striding forward with the things that you claim to stand for, but actually just striding forward the same old agenda which every shitbag bourgeois politician has in this country, which is slavish adherence to whatever the fuck the British ruling class tell them to do. Anyway, the aforementioned British ruling class have been up to their old tricks again. Just in this brings us to our final story of the day, which is that they have signed what they're calling a declaration of intent with the French. Our old friend Emmanuel Macron has returned to sign with Keir Starmer a declaration of intent with regard to the deployment of French and British forces to Ukraine, presuming that, by the way, John Swinney is fully on board with this as well, because he's a pro-NATO man, to deploy troops to Ukraine in the event of a ceasefire. Now, what this refers to is a plan that's been kicking around a long time, but has been restated again with the fraudulent so-called peace negotiations that Trump has been pushing recently. Now, Trump is saying that he's got most of the peace deal done. He actually hasn't. But this is where Macron and Starmer weighed in and say, as soon as there's a ceasefire, we will deploy a stabilization force to Ukraine. So there is a declaration of intent that was signed 2 days ago in Paris, which would create a multinational force that would deploy to Ukraine as soon as there is a ceasefire. And the document, which you can read on the British Ministry of Defence website or the British Central Government's website, they commit to, as they put it, reaffirming Ukraine's sovereignty. Ukraine hasn't had any sovereignty since 1991, by the way, and Euro-Atlantic trajectory, meaning they aim to deploy British and French troops there in order to continue to pull what's left of Ukraine towards NATO. Now, and they say this is also about strengthening Ukraine's position in peace talks through military, economic, and diplomatic tools, and rebuilding Ukrainian offensive capability, meaning air defense and also retraining the army and also industrial regeneration, as they put it. And it would include air, land, and sea elements. So basically plans for some kind of army of occupation inside Ukraine post ceasefire. that's the plan. And Friedrich Merz, the clown, who is currently the Chancellor of Germany, says that he might get on board with this as well. Now, the problem is, of course, that there is no ceasefire, nor will there be, because this plan essentially would deliver all the things that the Russian Federation's government went to war in the first place to prevent, namely the occupation of and the turning of Ukraine into a permanent military garrison for NATO, which is what the British and the French declaration, with the Germans backing them up, aims to do. So the other problem is, of course, Trump declares that there's only 10% of the way to go. But one of the things that they, of course, have not settled and cannot settle is the territorial question. So the question of like where the line of control is to be. Zelensky and the Ukrainian government haven't agreed that, nor are they going to agree that. The question of the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, the US under Trump has put forward some like weird scheme about how this is going to be co-managed by Russia and the United States, and like it's going to be used for Bitcoin mining. With the Trump administration, it's always some stupid, fraudulent scheme that Trump himself probably has some shares in. Now, the Declaration of Intent signed by the French and the British doesn't address any of those territorial problems at all. And the other problem is, of course, that, well, is even the Kiev Independent has to point out that, well, you won't be able to get these in if there's no ceasefire, and there's not going to be a ceasefire if you're saying that as soon as there's a ceasefire, we're going to put NATO troops on the ground. And the other point is that, well, how feasible is it that the British and the French can put enough troops on the ground to even make any kind of difference? The most that the British have in terms of actual soldiers that they could deploy is around about 10,000. And that's according to a former defense minister for the Tories. So it's even less than we previously thought. So what are 10,000 men going to do? The Ukrainians have lost, well, according to some figures, well over 1 million. The Russians have at their disposal at the moment, between 700,000 to 1 million men that they could potentially deploy to the Ukrainian theater of operations, should they choose to do so. So what are 10,000 Brits going to do in that situation? Unless, of course, the Russians capitulate and allow them to be deployed there, which the Putin administration can't possibly agree to that, because that would be political suicide for them to do that. Having suffered more Russian casualties have been endured in this war than in any war waged by the Soviet Union since World War II itself, since the Great Patriotic War. Far more than were killed in either of the Chechen campaigns, far more than were killed in Afghanistan. So how on earth, even if Kirill Dmitriev got his way and there was some shit sellout deal sold to the Russians, and they went and tried to get away with this, the Russian population wouldn't wear it either. So this isn't something that can be agreed to. And more to the point, I don't think that this is something which is serious in the slightest, because if you read the document, it comes across as basically just a lot of waffle, which is all the French and British are really capable of. They can't deploy vast numbers of troops to Ukraine because they don't have any, nor are they likely to have any. Now, the Russians also know this. It's why the Russian defense strategy says that they don't anticipate a full war with NATO before 2030. I think that's being generous, to be completely honest. I don't think NATO is going to be capable of wielding an army together, welding an army together that's going to be that big by 2030, but that's a slight digression. So what is the purpose of this document then? Because it's not a realistic prospect that France and Britain are going to deploy this force to Ukraine. The purpose of it is to do two things. One, bolster Zelensky's position. That's one thing, because it's looking increasingly shaky. Two, solidify those Ukrainian elements in the Kiev regime who are getting a bit wobbly and looking at all the advances that the Russians are making on the battlefield and thinking, we might be fucked here, maybe it's time to bail out. Give the illusion that, oh, the British are coming, the French are coming, my God, it's the Crimean War all over again. Where's the Light Brigade? But also, quite cynically, from the British and the French point of view, to make sure that the Russians don't agree to anything. By attaching this to it, you make sure that there can be no agreement, which in the end is the only strategy that all of the Western powers can actually agree on. They all agree that they still need Russia to be defeated. They just disagree as to how they should do it, in what order they should do it. Some of the cleverer elements in the Trump administration think that they can basically purchase the loyalty of the Russian bourgeoisie. And if your sole experience of the Russian bourgeoisie is Kirill Dmitriev, then I'm not surprised that they think that. And they still hope to lever the Russians away from their alliance with the Chinese and bring them back into some kind of alliance with the United States. That's the hope of some in the Trump administration. It's not going to work because there are other elements inside the American system which just want the war to continue indefinitely. So this is another scheme cooked up by the British and the French, the aim of which is to make sure that there can be no negotiated outcome. And in this case, they will get their way, but there will be no Anglo-French force for Ukraine. They don't have the men to do it. They won't take that risk. This is a cynical maneuver only designed to make sure that the Ukrainians keep doing the fighting and the dying. So, right. Okay, so just going to read a couple of comments here because it looks like we've got quite a few people watching. So we have nearly 260 of you watching on Rumble and YouTube and Twitch. We have, how many here? We have 363 of you watching on X or Twitter. That is excellent. And we got a good few of you watching here on Substack as well. Good to see you all. Be sure to like and share the stream if you have not done so already. Right. Defiance 856 says any non-Ukrainian troops in the theatre will be tracked from points of origins and would suffer incredible casualties by standoff capacities. They would not even reach the lines, which is a good point. Quite how, I mean, it's not a serious proposal and isn't going to happen. Quite how Starmer and Macron ever thought they were going to be allowed to march into Ukraine is anybody's guess. There is this tremendously arrogant thing about the Western powers, which is that they think that they have not only the right to go anywhere and march anywhere, but they don't think anybody should be able to fire on them. That's one of the big things that you see amongst the politicians. Like they have this belief that it's very unsporting for the other side to shoot back. The British should just be allowed to march in and occupy it, and these dastardly Russians should be fair and just allow us a victory without a shot being fired. Right. Okay. So. A lot of people looking up who John Swinney is. Well, I wouldn't bother. It's just imagine an unending bowl of porridge and unsweetened and unsalted porridge, and that's him. Basically, like a yawning void of nothing. Okay, so Irish Partisan says it's reported and that an Oreshnik missile hit a target in Lvov. Haven't seen that. But I'll have a look at that one. Nurse82 says some elements of the Zirinovsky clique here in Australia, e.g. Aussie Cossack, just declared in Telegram that Russia should act in its own self-interest and accept a deal with the US over old alliances. And there you have it. There you have it. Which is that I mean, I always maintained that Zirinovsky was a fucking fraud, basically an actor, but he's the so-called ultra nationalists in Russia are nothing of the kind. They are compradors in disguise. That's why they're so enthusiastic about Tsarism and stuff like that. They cringe. They give off this sort of foaming at the mouth, like screaming at the West, but also cringe and cower before it, just as much as the Russian liberals do, with whom they're still locked in sort of a love-hate relationship. But basically, they are they are essentially the same kind of people. There's a reason why Navalny could easily go from being a Russian Nazi to a Russian liberal icon and never really change his politics. So the this is the ultra nationalists at work. There's nothing ultra about them or particularly nationalistic. They're just a bunch of fucking comprador scum who dress up and LARP as czarists. And actually they are czarists, they have the same politics as the czardom, and desperately want to do a deal with the West. That's what they want to do. And that's reflected in like Russian Nazism. It's why so many Russian Nazis ended up fighting with the Kiev regime. And ultimately that it exposes them really for what they are, you know. Okay. Moving on, Alan Smith says this administration really is made up of brutal savages. Well, yes. The last one was as well, but this one, another big reason why the liberals in the United States still got very upset about the Trump administration is because they know on some level that the continued existence of the US bourgeois state requires a gigantic amount of violence and savagery, but they don't like to see it. They don't like to have it thrown in their face. Trump's throwing it in their face. They want, when a shooting like this occurs, they want Barack Obama, or even Joe Biden, but Obama or Gavin Newsom or, you know, that fat fucking idiot from Illinois, Pritzker, or somebody to go out there, or Zoran Mamdani, to go out there and cry and say it's terrible and we should do something, there will be an investigation. Whereas Trump just goes around and goes, it's great, it's totally justified. That woman's car was a terrorist, you know? And this is the nature of their objection to him is that he pulls the mask off. Remember, I mentioned the case of Mike Brown in Ferguson a while back. Remember all the civil rights activists in Ferguson who mysteriously died over the course of just a few years. I believe it was up to, I'll have to look it up. I haven't got the figures to hand, but I think it was about 16 of them died, like their corpses were found in burnt out cars that was ruled as like suicides. There's people who died with like 3 shots to the back of the head that was ruled as a suicide. Like there is, like I say, there's fascistic elements that operate both within and slightly outside of the US, various US state forces. And then that includes like death squad work as well. And that's always been there. But again, the liberals don't want to confront that. Trump just keeps throwing it in their face, partially because he's just an asshole and enjoys doing stuff like that. But it's also a reflection of the fact that part of the American ruling class thinks that, actually does genuinely think that the reason why they've lost their way is because they're just not being tough enough. And you can be damn sure that will translate into, and we should have been harder on the working class pretty soon. Adam Zeal says, my city council member is asking citizens to patrol the Minneapolis streets. Crazy. Well, that's like, I would say, a sort of classic example of somebody presenting a demand without thinking it through, even if it's sincere. Because, okay, you're going to ask people to go out on the street and patrol the streets. How? What, you're just going to suddenly get a group together and arm them and hope that they've got guns? What are you going to do? You know, by this is why I reject this sort of pseudo anarchist nonsense from these like soft leftists. Like, you ask a bunch of people to go and patrol the streets and make sure ICE aren't there, who are armed and dangerous. You're going to get a bunch of people with like not even basic military training to go out there and like do citizens patrol. This doesn't make any sense. It certainly doesn't make any good sense. This is the kind of thing that like emotional social democrats do. If you're going to put forward like demands around like workers taking over management of their particular areas, well, then you need to spend quite some time building and preparing for that. You can't just throw the demand out there. It's like when, you know, DSA and co suddenly said abolish the police. It's like, well, what does that even fucking mean in the context of like American capitalism? It's never going to happen. So you're basically selling people on a piece of bullshit, the idea that it ever could. So this is all comes out of the same like ultra left and opportunistic like turns that the American soft left does. They don't put any thought into things, you know. John Brown's people didn't have military training. This isn't the time of John Brown. I hate to tell you. I believe some of them did. Yeah, I mean, John Brown at least had a plan. I mean, John Brown had a plan to start like, to start the Civil War. He had a plan to free slaves in Kansas. Like he was a dedicated revolutionary, not some bullshitter city councillor. So yeah, and one of them did have military training, I'm sure, some element of it. So President Jesus says, debate club champion JD Vance has been deployed to handle the fallout over the usual goons. It must be a crisis. He's wearing a special variety of eyeliner just for this special occasion. Apparently, there's multiple explosions in and around Lvov. Okay. Right. T.D. Wilson says ICE offers $50,000 sign-up fees and student loan cancellation. The only way you're going to get your student loan cancelled in the United States, you've got to join ICE and be prepared to kill at least one person. Hello to Svetlana over there in Moscow. And a happy Orthodox Christmas to those who are celebrating. Right. Okay. So I feel like what I need to do to catch up on all the stuff on this chat is probably do a special like question and answer stream at some point where I pick up on all the questions from the various streams over the course of the week. So maybe I will have to do that in the next few days. So I'm going to draw things to a close for this evening. Thanks to all, over 600 of you who are tuning in live. That's excellent. So I'll be back again tomorrow with more of this, and you can expect another Decline and Fall show pretty soon as well. But before I go, I will thank everybody who supports the show on Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee, and those who subscribe on Substack. Couldn't do this without you. More Patreon specials coming up, and we had another Patreon Q&A just the other day. And I will return to you tomorrow with more on all of these rapidly developing stories. 2026 is off to be a real barn burner of a year. I won't close the show out with anything by Vanilla Ice or Ice T or Ice Cube. I think that would be an extremely tasteless and copyright infringing thing for me to do. So here is your video outro for the day.
Его утренний мостяк в жизни важен первый шаг. Слышишь, веют над страною ветры яростных атак. И вновь продолжает собой, и сердцу тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. Весть летит во все концы, вы поверьте нам, отцы, будут новые победы, станут новые бойцы.
Впереди.
милости не жди, жизнь для правды не щади. Нам, ребята, в этой жизни только с правдой по пути.
И вам,